Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please hit that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate a small amount given in the link in the description box. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Norman Finkelstein. Professor Finkelstein teaches political science. His books include The Holocaust Industry, Reflections on the Exploitation of Jewish Suffering, Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom, and his latest book is Gaza's Gravediggers, an inquiry into corruption in high places. Professor Finkelstein, welcome back to Indian Global Left.
Thank you for having me.
I want to discuss your latest article on the Israeli Civil Commission on allegations about rape and sexual violence committed on October 7. I think the report was from May 2026. Before we get into the report and your critique, I have a broader question for you. What in your assessment, or let me put it this way, why do you think the rape narrative becomes so important in the aftermath of October 7?
There are really two aspects to that question. The first thing is not obviously, but Israeli propaganda is directed primarily at the United States. The domestic recipients of the propaganda, they don't need the stimulus of rape to go out and kill Palestinians or Gazans. That's at this point a sport for Israelis to kill them. It's like a child with a magnifying glass burning ants and the glee that child derives from it. So there was no particular reason why that particular hoax was fabricated to stimulate or incite Israel's domestic population. But for the Americans' constituency, for various reasons, the most obvious being the long history in our country of rape allegations allegedly perpetrated by people of quote unquote color, that has a very I don't like to use the word in this context, but it has a very rich history in the United States. And it was behind the lynchings. Frequently, it was behind the lynchings of African Americans. And it still has a resonance, even post-civil rights era in the United States. So, that I think was its prime purpose, especially in the woke era of Me Too. Trust women or believe women in that particular moral ambiance. It was going to stick. It was going to resonate. And in particular, it was going to silence any critical assessment of the allegation as being an apologist for rape. And in fact, it succeeded. It wasn't just the usual suspects who latched on, or I should say, validated the rape hoax. It was Human Rights Watch. It was Amnesty International. It was the UN Commission of Inquiry. All the major human rights organizations and investigative bodies gave a rubber stamp to this allegation. So it succeeded. In Al-Qayyum, let me just give the background. In May 2026, this person named Dr. Kochav El-Kayem Levy published a report titled Silence No More, as if anyone were ever silenced, another hoax, or an ancillary hoax. And it ran to 300 pages, a hefty report, and by its sheer physical weight, it seemed to be irrefutable. So the allegations then received wisdom, and then received wisdom was then validated again. The original allegations by the State of Israel were validated by this UN Secretary General Guterres's special envoy for sexual violence in war. Her name is Pramila Patten, a bovine, in my opinion, a self-important bovine, in my opinion. She validated the claims, even though she stated in her report she had no authority to validate the claims. She said, we're not an investigative body. But her not being an investigative body and not having the wherewithal, a competent staff to weigh the allegations, she went ahead and said it happened. That was the first round. The second round is Dr. Professor Kochav El-Kayem Levy, who is simply and straightforwardly a Hitlerite propagandist. So she produced this new report, which seemed again to validate the original allegations. So that's the first reason, the reception it expected to gain in the United States. The second thing was kind of strange. Namely, Israel already had a case, atrocities of a significant magnitude happen on October 7th. There's no gainsaying that fact. But weirdly, I should say, they decided, the Israeli Hasbara, their professional propagandists, they decide to draw the red line in the sand on rape and sexual violence. It really was, you might say, gratuitous at a legal level. There was already a case of significant magnitude just in the sheer killings that occurred on October 7th. But as I said, weirdly, from a legal perspective, but probably from a media perspective, especially in the age of, or we're now passing, but it was the age of high wokeness, the assumption was, it seems, by Israeli propaganda agencies, which we'll abbreviate by using the Israeli term Hasbara, they assumed that from a media point of view, who cares about killings? Killings are a dime a dozen. What really captures the headlines and foments a hysteria is allegations of these feral, dark-skinned, sexually repressed Muslims raping Israeli virginally innocent women. That would capture the headlines. So they decide to draw the line there. And so that it's weird, I have to say, from an evidentiary point of view, it's weird that the fake allegations about rape and sexual violence came to overshadow what were real crimes.
Right. I want you to tell our viewers a little bit about what is your critique. It's a long critique, as I understood. The crux of the critique was a two-pronged argument. The first is that in that enormous digital archive documenting the crimes, there was no crime that records sexual violence or rape. And secondly, given the report itself claims that Hamas used these their crimes or the atrocities to traumatize Israeli society, there is it is mind-boggling to say that sexual violence and rape wouldn't be used. That seemed to me as the crux of your argument, even though there were many layers. So if you could unpack some of these layers based on which you dismiss the entire report, that would be helpful.
Okay, let's start from the beginning. There are three kinds of evidence normally used by human rights organizations to document crimes. One, there's forensic evidence, examining a body and maybe fluids found in the body, things like that. In the case of October 7th, there is no such evidence. The claim was made. I found it plausible, although I'm not a forensic pathologist, speaking as a layperson. The claim was made that the magnitude of killings on October 7th was something that Israel wasn't prepared for. It didn't have the personnel to process so many bodies in a short period of time. And a short period of time means that there are certain Jewish burial rituals. I believe it's either 24 or 48 hours when let me just move back. There are Oh, gosh. That never happened before. Okay.
Yeah, we'll edit this part out, so don't worry.
Okay. That they had only a short window of opportunity to process all these bodies for Jewish burial. And so there was no time for forensic pathologists to examine the bodies in a thorough way and collect evidence. I can't say that's true, but it certainly sounded plausible. So there's no what they call in one of the reports, no medical legal evidence available for claims of rape and other forms of sexual violence. So that brings us to the second category of evidence normally used, which is digital evidence, photographs, now digital in terms of cameras and so forth. This last report stated that they had 10,000. Is it 10 or 11?
10,000.
10,000 photographs and digital segments from October 7th. Now, to give the listeners some idea of what that means, 10,000, they said it would take a researcher, it would take 1,800 hours to go through all of the evidence, the digital evidence they collected, which means if you were to sit down and go through the evidence, look at it for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would take you fully more than 7 months to go through all the digital evidence. Now, the digital photographic evidence covered a relatively narrow area of land. It's called the Gaza envelope. It was a small area of land. And it included CCTV, traffic cams, iPhones. In the case of the material it collected from Hamas militants, which are called extensive. It includes body cams, dash cams, GoPros. So we have a huge trove of photographic and digital evidence covering a relatively narrow, spatially narrow area, and every imaginable photographic and digital form of evidence. There is not a single photograph, not a single digital frame, digital segment, not a single digital segment of rape or sexual violence. That's odd. That's just strange. Now, the commission at some points, the civil commission, at some points, it alleges that Hamas did post images of sexual violence, that it did not recoil from posting such images, because according to the report, the purpose of this sexual violence was to shatter the national spirit, the national esprit. But when they go through the actual evidence that Hamas posted on the social media, in some cases they say that Hamas confiscated from the victims their iPhones, and then the Hamas gained access to their social media and transmitted the images with the intention of shattering the morale. When they go through the inventory, I mean the Civil Commission, when they inventory the images they possess, no mention of sexual violence. There is what's called desecration of a corpse. Yes, there are examples of desecration, but there are no examples of rape or other forms of sexual violence. Amnesty International explicitly stated that not only do we have no examples of it, nobody has even heard as a rumor that such photographic digital evidence exists. So, if the report is correct that Hamas posted all of the imagery of sexual violence, including rape, because it wanted to shatter the national spirit, of Israelis, traumatized Israeli society. If they didn't post any, the only logical conclusion is because they didn't have any. And if they didn't have any, the only logical conclusion is it didn't happen. And that just then leaves the third form of evidence. And the third form is testimonial evidence by witnesses or by actual survivors. So let me take that in reverse order. In the case of October 7th, there is only one person who has stepped forward publicly and said he was subject to rape. It was a male. We don't know his name. Probably Israelis know. I'm just going by the documents. I think he goes by D period. I believe that's how he's designated in the documents. Number one, he's not taken seriously in Israel. He's not mentioned in the official Israeli reports. Number two, as quoted in the commission's report, he never said he was raped. So the only rape victim to step forward never says he was raped. Then we turn to the category of sexual violence, including rape inflicted on hostages. Again, only one alleged survivor of rape stepped forward. But if you read her testimony as reported in the Civil Commission report, she never said she was raped. And not Susanna. Her name is widely reported. She never says she was raped. She said something terrible happened to me sexually. What it was, I have no idea. People ask me, what do you think happened? I don't know. I am curious why they didn't just ask her. She's been all over the place. She became the poster woman for Hamas rape. Why didn't they just ask her? So there are no survivors either of October 7th or of being held in captivity. No survivors of October 7th or captivity who have said they were raped. There is no digital evidence. There's no photographic evidence. So that just leaves witnesses. In the first place, and I know this is a broad brush statement, I wouldn't believe what an Israeli says about anything. If they said it was sunny outside, I would not trust that until I walked over to my window, opened it up, and looked up in the sky. This is a pathologically dishonest society. They're completely demented. It's a demented society. Now, you may say you shouldn't generalize. Well, I will generalize. That's what sociology is all about. It's about generalizations. If you didn't have generalization, how could you comment on the voting patterns of a particular ethnic group? Isn't that a generalization? How could you comment on the occupational pattern of a particular ethnic group? Isn't that a generalization? So I would generally say Israeli is a pathologically demented society, and you can't trust the word they say. 88% of Israelis, 88%, here I'm referring, of course, to Jewish Israelis, 88% give their army, the IDF, calling it high marks for morality in war. High marks for morality in war. And they responded to this poll in the midst of their Highmark's army carrying out a genocide in real time, in broad daylight. They post it on the web, and they give it high marks. So, and there's a real esprit de corps in Israel, this rallying. It has multiple levels. Rallying around kin. It's a Jewish state. We're all related. So it's a blood rallying around the flag. Then there is the rallying around the flag of their own state. That's fairly typical. And then there's a third element. There's the kinship or blood affinity. There is the nation state affinity. So the first is compounded by the second. And then, in my opinion, the most significant affinity is that they all went through the army. It's a citizen army. And for Israelis, that is the seminal Israeli Jews. That's the seminal experience in life. The unit they served with. I met Israelis, older generation, and they still look back wistfully and proudly at having served in the army together, their unit, their division, the high-ranking parachute division and so forth. So when you put that all together in the midst of a genocide and in the midst of trying to maximally demonize Hamas, why would I believe a word they say? Why? I think the evidentiary value of their testimony is below zero. And anyhow, a human rights organization has a standard of proof to judge the probative value of evidence. And the standard of proof is witnesses plus digital evidence. In the absence of the digital evidence, the evidence has no probative value. Now, you might say, how would hostages have digital evidence? That's crazy what you're saying. Well, according to you, meaning the Civil Commission, according to you, Hamas was purposely photographing its criminal holding of hostages, sending home to families images of the hostages, that's what they say, designed to shatter them. So images of hostages pleading on the camera to be released, images of hostages looking emaciated. Well, then why didn't they send back images of the hostages being subject to rape and sexual violence? What happened?
Yeah, Israel
People
also.
ask me
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, people ask me the question, like my good friend and colleague and comrade, Jamie Stern Weiner. He said, why do you think they did that? Namely, up until the Civil Commission report, the figure that was being disseminated by Israeli Hasbara was 5,000 photographic images and digital segments. They doubled it to 10,000. And why do you think they made the claim that Hamas purposely, intentionally, premeditatedly posted the images of rape, including sexual violence, in order to traumatize Israeli society when they knew they had no such images. So the logic of the argument, if you forgive me for repeating, is if they don't have the images, if they didn't post the images, then it must be because they don't have them. And if they don't have them, it must mean because it didn't happen. Well, he asked, why do you think they committed such fatal, and it is fatal, why they committed such fatal blunders in presenting their case? And the answer is simple, because nobody pays attention. Once they got their case out, I just checked before this program. You could check yourself. I was curious. I went to the Wikipedia page on sexual violence October 7th. I was curious, did they post, because usually it's very rapidly, they update it. Did they comment on what I posted? No, and they never will, I believe. They mentioned things that Brianna Joy Gray has said. They mentioned things that Max Blumenthal had said. And obviously, what they had to say had merit, for sure. But in terms of a systematic analysis, which I did in the book, I already did it at the time of Pramila Patton's report. To do what I do best, which is forensic analysis. To sit down, go through all the footnotes, go through all the arguments, see if it holds together. It's just ignored. It's just ignored. So they knew they would get away with it. What everybody says is, it's 300 pages. It's 300 pages. How could you doubt the veracity of the claim in the face of such a massive document? In fact, it's not 300 pages. Of the 300 pages, about half deal with the raw evidence. Pages 50 to 130, if I'm not mistaken. And then each piece of evidence is repeated over and over and over and over again. This mind-numbing repetition. Mind-numbing repetition. You don't notice it at first, what's going on here. You don't notice it. It was classical Hitler propaganda techniques. Hitler said, unless you keep repeating the claim, it won't stick. We have our own version of that, by the way. And of all places, who adopted the Hitler technique? You want to know who adopted it? You're going to laugh. The New York City subway system. Now you're thinking to yourself, what the hell is he talking about? So I'll tell you what I'm talking about. It used to be in subway cars long before you were even conceived, let alone born. It used to be in the subway cars, you have at the top one ad for one product, another ad for another product, another ad for another product. So some PR person obviously read the chapter on propaganda in Mein Kampf and realized this is not going to work. So what did they do? They would rent every space in a subway car and keep repeating the ad, repeating the ad, repeating the ad, repeating the ad to make it stick. And what the Hitlerite propagandist Dr. Kochav Elchaim Levy, if I had a name like that and I was taking an SAT, by the time I finished entering my name, the exam would be over, but that's for another day. She adopted the Hitler technique and kept repeating and repeating and repeating, sometimes repeating the same piece of quote unquote evidence twice in the same paragraph, twice in the same footnote. It was completely insane. And then the other Hitlerite technique, many people don't understand it, what the big lie means, the Hitler big lie. The Hitler big lie technique is, he says, everybody makes small lies. So if you hear somebody make a small lie, let's say I make a small lie, Jayutish is handsome. So that's a small lie. So, you figure maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. Okay? Because we all lie a little, so maybe it's true, maybe it's not true.
That's a big lie.
No. The big lie is you say something so outrageous, so it defies effrontery, this lie. The assumption is nobody would dare say something like that unless it were true. It has to be true, because who would have the effrontery to say something like that unless it were true? That's the big lie. So his basic thesis, as we might call it, it's an interesting idea, I believe. The more outrageous the lie, the more plausible it is. The less outrageous the lie, the more you doubt. Because maybe it's true, maybe it's not. For a little lie, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. You know, if you say, my neighbor is having an affair, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. If I said, my neighbor is fornicating with a goat, that must be true. He could not possibly have said that unless it were true. So, to put it again simply, the more outrageous the lie, the more plausible. And then you read in the report the craziest things. You have one responder, first responder as they're called, saying he came to a woman's body. He couldn't close the legs of the body. The legs were spread. He couldn't close them because her vagina was stuffed with aluminum cans. Stuffed with aluminum cans. As if these Hamas people, before coming to Gaza, has swept the shelves of the local supermarket of all the Campbell soup cans, and in the midst of their operation, were trying to break the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of Campbell soup cans you can stuff into a woman's vagina. It was like completely nutty. I mean, if you read some of the descriptions, and I don't know how far you got in the article, if you read some of the
I finished the article.
Right. The only thing they didn't stuff inside a woman's vagina, so far as we can tell, was the bathroom sink, the toilet bowl, and the local gas station. Completely nuts. But she was operating on the Hitlerite technique of she couldn't possibly have invented this sort of stuff. She must be telling the truth. And then the whole thing was taken over, appropriated by people like the former COO of Meta, Sheryl Sandberg, who makes this film documentary called Screams Before Silence. Actually, I don't know how good your Yiddish is, but it should be called Schlock Before Scheiß. I can see from your face you don't know what that means. Schlock means garbage, Scheiß means SHIT. So schlock before Scheiß. In which she's looking in her iPhone at an image of the sexual horrors Hamas inflicted on women. And she goes, "Oh my God." She's emoting for the camera. I challenged her. I recently did an interview with Tucker Carlson. I said she's full of shit. I used the word. I don't know if it will survive editing. And let's have a public reckoning whether all of this was fabricated or not.
Given
By
the
the way, I got some irate emails from people when I posted the article saying, "What about all the people who were killed?" I said, I don't dispute that. I think your quarrel is with the state of Israel, not with me. Ask them why they fabricated and then went full throttle with this hoax. They were the ones who discredited the memory of those killed on October 7th, not me. I acknowledge it. They were the ones, as they always do. They discredited the whole memory of the Nazi Holocaust. They are the greatest fomenters, they meaning the Israeli state, the greatest fomenters of Holocaust denial, not insignificant, trivial, marginal figures like Arthur Butts or David, his name just slipped my mind, David Irving. Not them. It's the Israelis. They're the greatest fomenters of Holocaust denial because they lie about everything. So the reasonable inference is if they lie about everything, then maybe they're lying about the Nazi Holocaust. It's very, I won't call it painful, but it is a sore point for me that nowadays I have to, in interviews, state that the Nazi Holocaust did happen. And that's all caused by Israel. They are
yeah,
the greatest fomenters of Holocaust denial.
given the lack of forensic evidence, digital evidence, the singular case of actual testimony from hostages where there is no direct confession about rape, and the incredibility or incredulous, I'm not sure which is the right word, but given the lack of credibility of the test witnesses, I'm thinking about some of the debates that happened on the subject in the aftermath of October 7, and a lot of people on the Palestinian side even said that, well, we don't deny that sexual violence could have happened, but there was no systematic use of rape as a part of Hamas's strategy during Alaska flood operation. Now, having read your piece, it seems to me that the case might be even stronger. So my question to you, Professor Finkelstein, is: would you remain confined in saying that rape was not used as a systematic tool in Hamas strategy, or would you go further to say that we are not even sure if there was any crimes that involve use of sexual violence?
First of all, you can never prove a negative. You can't prove that some Gazan, there were, after the initial operation by Hamas and other militant groups, a lot of people from Gaza just strayed into the southern part of Israel. The gates were, the fence was broken. They strayed, apparently committed some robbery, theft of from homes. Um, One of them could have grabbed a woman, gone into a cave. Who knows? I don't know. You can't prove it. It didn't happen. What you can say is there's no evidence that it did happen. That much I think you could say with certainty. There's no evidence that it did happen. Beyond that, I wouldn't go. There's no material evidence, and I don't trust the testimonial evidence. I don't trust them. For reasons which I've already stated, I think the probative value of a Israeli citizen on this matter is less than zero. When they're exonerating members of the IDF, they're also exonerating themselves. They were part of that fighting force. Remember, the largest massacre occurred at the Supernova Music Festival. It was mostly young people who had just served or may still be serving in the IDF. It's them. It's their friends. It's their relatives. It's an indictment, not just of them, so to speak. It's an indictment of them and us. So they have a real material interest to lie. I don't believe a word that these people say. I mean, some of the testimony, their star witness on rape, their star witness on rape is not an eyewitness. It's what they call an ear witness. I believe her name was Darren Komarev. So what does she say? Now, let me repeat. This is their star witness. It's the first item. She says, I was sitting in a caravan, a container, no windows, no nothing. And she says, and I'm quoting her, I heard 3 rapes. I heard 3 rapes, a gang rape, and then 2 separate discrete rapes. And she said, I heard it, here I'm quoting her, here, here, and here. Here, here, and here. Okay? I'm thinking to myself, I live in a moderately sized apartment. When I hear a buzzer, I should say I live near a parkway, Ocean Parkway. When I hear a buzzer, I can't tell whether it's the buzzer to my door or it's a buzzer outside. I can't tell the difference. But she heard 3 discrete rapes in 3 different places from the confines of a cubicle and saw nothing. She says, they shot one person in front of his girlfriend. How would she know that? How would she even know they were boyfriend and girlfriend? How do you know that? I'm thinking to myself, she didn't see anything. So how does she know it was boyfriend and girlfriend? I'm thinking to myself, did she hear the Boston Pops, the Vienna Boys Choir, and the Beatles reunion? Here, here, and here? just ridiculous. But again, do you think among the endorsers, Hillary Clinton, do you think she read the report? Sheryl Sandberg, do you think she read the report? The diminutive hoodlum, Rahm Emanuel. Did he read the report? They don't read anything. They just say it's 300 pages. No one read the report. No one read the report. I'm sure, as certain as I am, that I'm not going to be around much longer, as certain as I am of that, no one read the report. No, I really believe that. It was so boring. It was so repetitive. I had to ask myself as I pored over the pages each night, Norman, you have only a small finite number of years left. Is this making the best, the most productive use of those finite years? Nobody read it. It was so horrible.
On the repetitive thing, I wonder which was more repetitive, reading Chuck Schumer's book or this report for you.
Look, I cannot deny the fact that Chuck Schumer was a very smart guy. And it shows you what happens. I mean this. It shows you what happens, how a mind can atrophy when you become a hack.
Or maybe it wasn't his mind at all. It was written by someone else.
The prose was terrible. And his sister, who's thanked in the book, Fran Schumer, I knew 60 years ago. Brilliant young woman, brilliant girl. Then girl, now good. And she's now a gifted poet. She's a gifted poet. And I read the book. It's so terrible. The prose is so ghastly. I think to myself, Fran is thanked for reading the manuscript. And I'm thinking to myself, Fran, why didn't you turn to your brother and say, Chucky, don't do it. Don't do it. I don't know. Really, it's a perplexity to me. It's a perplexity. I'm sure she read it. Fran serious.
Yeah.
I'm sure she didn't read the sexual violence report, but she probably repeats the propaganda for the cause.
Yeah, I have a more serious question that I've been thinking to ask you. A lot of people, including those on the Palestinian, or I should rather say mostly on the Palestinian side, would say that we need a serious independent commission of investigation to actually know about what happened on October 7. There are even people on the Palestinian side who would be very reluctant to admit any type of crimes or atrocities, let alone of sexual violence. So you discussed in your article about how biased the civil commission was because of the location they were situated in, taking that as a therapy, not putting the witnesses, not pressing them with uncomfortable questions. So I'm just curious, if you were to be part of any such, just hypothetically speaking, if you were to be part of any such independent investigative commission, what would be your approach? Like, do you begin by saying, I don't trust any of anything that you say, and so I want to be an inquisitor, I would be as rude and as harsh as possible? Or it's a methodological question that I'm asking. Or would you brush aside testimonies in toto and then look for evidence somewhere else, maybe material, maybe somewhere else? What would be the approach of that independent inquiry commission if that were to be set up? I know there is very little likelihood, but just asking in terms of my curiosity for methods, like what would be that method?
I've been asked that question. I've been asked that question. Am I setting a too high standard for Israelis? Is the bar too high when I say wouldn't trust a word they say? And I recognize that's a high standard. But I ask the question, if guards at Auschwitz said there were no gas chambers, would you believe them? I wouldn't. There's a standard presumption that you attach more value to evidence against interest than evidence that serves interest. For your listeners, that simply means if Hitler said there were no gas chambers, that's obviously in his interest, so you would attach very little evidentiary value to it. But if Himmler said there were gas chambers, you would attach a high amount of evidentiary value to it because it's against his interest. The problem with the Israelis is, as I said, because of the nature of that society, the kinship bonds, the army bonds, the unanimity in public opinion, 88% giving Israel high marks for the morality of the IDF. When you add up all those factors, I can't see attaching any evidentiary value to what they say. It's an interest. It's an interest. I mean, it's very striking when during the war in Vietnam, by 1968, ground troops enter 1965, March 1965. By 1969, there were very robust organizations of soldiers who came back and denounced what happened. There was called, my memory is here, I'm speaking from memory. There was the Winter Soldier investigations. There were the gatherings in Washington where soldiers in a bonfire hurled their medals that they received. There was a significant dissent by the soldiers about what happened in Vietnam. Go watch a very excellent documentary, probably among the best. I would strongly recommend for your listeners, a documentary on Vietnam entitled Hearts and Minds. And you'll see many soldiers are in that documentary. How many Israeli? The genocide's gone on coming October, it's 3 years. How many have stepped forward? There are a couple who get quoted in Haaretz for feeling traumatized. But this is they're always under siege, the siege mentality. I mean, when you add up all the factors, the cumulative result, can't trust the word they say. You can. They're a nation of child killers. Not just the ones who engage in target practice by shooting babies and children, toddlers and children, in the skull and in the chest. not only those who direct drones to shoot the children in the head, chest, and elsewhere. You could still say that's a select group. It's not, but let's make the argument. It's a select group. Everybody agreed during the Gaza genocide, everybody agreed that Israel was using starvation as a weapon of war. There wasn't a debate about that. Joseph Borrell, the head of the EU foreign policy chief, he was saying it. They were using starvation as a weapon of war. Every UN agency was saying it. Well, it takes a large coordination blocking food from entering Gaza. Excuse me. Preventing food from entering Gaza. Bombing all the agricultural fields so they can't produce food on their own. Gaza's population is half children. If you're a participant in the utilization of starvation as a weapon of war, and every Israeli serving in Gaza participate one way or another in that by prohibiting food from entering, from destroying the agricultural fields so they won't have homegrown food. They're all participants in starving children. They're a nation of child killers. So of course, they're going to deny, and also affirm Hamas iniquity, affirm it and affirm it. I wouldn't trust the word they say.
I have one closing question, and that's going beyond the article, perhaps even changing the subject a little bit, which I have intended to ask you for a while, and that is about really philosophical, probably a question about whether what individual Hamas fighters did as part of Operation Alaska Flood can be categorized as crimes. And just to give you a couple of my thoughts, I find your overall framework of the Operation Flood as a rebellion or comparison with Nat Turner's rebellion very compelling. And I think that's a very correct framework. And yet there are atrocities that are inflicted on individuals who we can hold collectively responsible, but at a very direct level, at least at the particular point in time, it may be disconnected from their actions. And so I'm curious, how would you describe some of the atrocities, or whether you describe them as atrocities, whether you describe them as crimes? And my final thought is, I'm asking this because in a brilliant essay by an Indian historian, he did a case study of one. It was 1815 British India. A widow woman was she belonged to the oppressed caste. She conceived with the brother-in-law. We don't know whether it was forced or not, but because she belonged to the oppressed caste, the rules of the village was that she would be outcast if the child is born. And that's why the family was forced to help her abort the fetus. And in the process of abortion, she died. And the British legal courts tried her brothers and mother, and they were jailed. while the argument of the historian was that they were not the criminals, that was not the crime. The crime was the society structure that imposed that bearing the child would be a literal death for her because she would be outcast and she would have to leave the village. So he insisted that crime is a narrative and it's not something that is universal. So I wonder how do you describe some of those violence that was part of Operation Alaska Flood?
I would, of course, be interested in reading the reasoning of that historian that you mentioned. My own view, after a lot of contemplation, meditation, rumination on the subject, is there are dictionary definitions of what constitutes a war crime. And what happened was there were war crimes. You can't dispute it. There were civilians who were targeted. And whether you want to call it violating the principle of distinction between civilians and combatants, whether you want to call it an indiscriminate attack where they indiscriminately fired on civilians and combatants, or a disproportionate attack, whatever you want to call it, there were crimes. So I'm not going to argue with that. That's a legal definition, and I'm not going to quarrel with it. I have a problem with condemning the people of Hamas because, as I read the historical record, they had no options left in October 6, 2023. They tried diplomacy, they tried international law, they tried nonviolent civil resistance. By that point, Gaza had been forgotten by everyone, including myself. I had gone on to, so to speak, greener pastures, writing about cancel culture, which many people probably wished I had stuck with Gaza. What they did, in my opinion, no great strategic vision. It was a roll of the dice. Let's see if we can cause enough murder and mayhem that attention will be drawn to us. The issue of Gaza will return. They had no grand vision because the leaders, you take someone like Yahya Sinwar, he had spent 20 years in the prison cell in Israel. He got released in one of the prisoner exchanges. And as he put it, I went from one prison to another. I went from an Israeli prison to Gaza concentration camp. So when you exist in that kind of environment, your vision is going to be a tunnel vision. It's going to be very narrow. I don't think there was any great strategic calculation any more than there was what kind of strategic calculation could Nat Turner have had. He was a slave on a plantation. It seems like the only book he read was the Bible. He was an extremely smart guy, everybody said. White people, black people, Nat's a smart guy. But his vision is going to be very narrow. Has he read history? Had he read about the slave revolts in ancient Rome? Probably not. So it was an act of desperation. He thought, like Hamas, Nat Turner thought he would arouse a mass slave insurrection, his action. It didn't happen. And it didn't happen with Hamas either. The only ones who came to their support were the Hezbollah and the Houthis. Cautious support by Hezbollah, but not cautious enough that Israel didn't attempt to destroy it. And then the question becomes very simple, in my opinion. You're a white person. Let's say you're a white judge, because Turner was tried. He was captured and tried. Do you have the moral wherewithal to lecture Nat Turner on morality? Can you do that? Could you, Mr. Turner, are you aware of what a immoral act you committed? Would you lecture a slave on immorality? I couldn't do that. So I'm not going to condemn them. I will suspend judgment. I will recognize crimes according to the letter of the law were absolutely committed, but I refuse to put myself in the absolutely preposterous position of lecturing a slave or an inmate who had been born into, languished in, and was destined to die in what the head of Israel's National Security Council called a huge concentration camp. His name was Gear Island. He's still among the living. I'm going to put myself in that ridiculous position of lecturing the people of Gaza on immorality? No, no. So I suspend judgment.
Real quick on your point on the lack of grand vision, I wonder what you make of the argument that the short vision was, of course, exchange of prisoners so that some of the important fighters can be rescued, which was important for the national liberation movement, and the long-term vision was to start the world, at least the Arab world, whose, of course, the ruling circles have given up on Palestinian and Arab nationalism, but deep down, people still sympathize and are in solidarity with the Palestinian cause to start that world to run cold waters over experiments like the Abraham Accord. What do you make of that?
It takes a lot more calculation to do what they did. You have to factor in many. Do you think? I don't believe they told Iran or Hezbollah what they were going to do. I don't. You know why? Because they would have told them, you're crazy. Don't do that now. We're not ready. We're not prepared. Do you know what Israel's going to do? We know what Israel's going to do. We're not ready for it. We're not prepared. You can't just say, if you're a political person, you can't just say, this is what we want and this is what we'll do. There are 1,000 intermediate links and steps in an argument in a strategic argument like that. I don't think they did it. I don't think they calculated any of that. It was a roll of the dice for them. They were desperate. That was it. I'm not going to attach, any grand strategic vision any more than I would to Nat Turner. These people had not a clue what was going on really in the outside world. Most of them were just trying to survive. So I just don't see that kind of argument. I don't think we should engage in these kinds of fantasies. There was no resistance in Gaza. It's all a fantasy. There was no resistance. How could there be resistance? When each step that the IDF took when it entered Gaza was preceded by decimating, pulverizing, reducing to dust everything around them, left, right, and in front of them. How could there have been resistance in Gaza? It's ridiculous. But people glorify the resistance. Even now, they say, Israel has not achieved its war aim. Gaza, Hamas still, what are you talking about? You're such morons. Gaza has been hermetically sealed for 3 years. Where would they get ammunition from? Where would they get it from? Israel now controls physically 70% of Gaza. So, can there be any munition factories in Gaza in that 70% of a tiny parcel of land? And then you think their intelligence is insufficient not to know if there is a Hamas Lockheed Martin in the other 30%? It's so stupid. There's no Hamas resistance. Israel just says, we're not going to leave until everyone is disarmed. You know why? How do you know when it's disarmed? How do you know? Let's say Hamas said we disarm. What do you think Netanyahu's going to say? They're lying. Because the whole claim of resistance and now disarming Hamas, it's just a pretext to continue the genocide. But idiots talk about Israel hasn't achieved its aim in Gaza because Hamas is still armed. Oh, please stop. Have you heard about a battle in Gaza? A battle, one. Name me a battle. Has one battle been reported? In the 3 years, name me one. I followed every day. I'm not aware of one. I heard about a couple of ambushes at the very beginning. That was it. So Hamas's strategic vision, Hamas's armed resistance, it's all complete fantasy. It's my opinion. It's just you're playing along with Israel's big lie. And you know what the big lie is in Gaza? You want to know what the big lie is? The big lie is it's a war. That's the big lie. There was never a war in Gaza. I remember how indignant my late mother used to become when they would describe what she went through as a war. She said, what are you talking about? It wasn't a war. It was an extermination. She said we were like cockroaches. We would run here. It would shine the light on us. When the light was shown on us, we ran there, we ran here, and we ran there. It's not a war. It's an extermination. That's why Raoul Hilberg, in his great work on the Nazi Holocaust, he didn't call it the war against the Jews. He called it the destruction of European Jewry. Very different. Very different, as my late mother used to exclaim. It wasn't a war. It was an extermination. And unfortunately, some of these pseudo Che Guevaras play into the Israeli propaganda with their absurd fantasies of Hamas's resistance. Okay, another day.
We'll leave it there, Professor Finkelstein. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.